To address the Senate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you very much. And I've, along with my colleagues, have been in places across the country this past week. Most of my time was spent in Kansas, and certainly Kansans had a good opportunity to express to me some of their worries and concerns about what's going on in Washington, D.C. One of the things that's become very dominant in those conversations is the concern that this administration, Washington, D.C., that the Constitution, as we learned it, as we were taught in even high school government class, doesn't seem to be being complied with. And the concern is the constant efforts by this administration to do things unilaterally, to offer executive orders, to put in place executive orders and policies, regulations. And this has become a common conversation, and it's appealing to me, it's pleasing to me that Kansans care so much about the structure of our government, the foundation that was created by the framers of our Constitution, and the genuine concern that the Constitution is being violated. Often the conversation is, what are you doing about it? And the topic I want to talk about today is just one more example. Now, this one has a reasonably positive ending, but I want to highlight something that has transpired in Washington, D.C. that started last May at the Federal Communications Commission. And I just learned about this recently, and it became a much more common topic with knowledge across the country as a result of one of the FCC commissioners, Ajit Pai, and his opinion piece that appeared over the past few days in national publications. And what we learned was that the Federal Communications Commission was considering, in fact, put in place a program in which they were going to survey the broadcasters that they regulate. And they hired an outside firm, as I understand it, and questions were prepared that were going to be asked of people in newsrooms across the country. The pilot program was organized to occur in South Carolina, and among the kinds of questions that were going to be asked in newsrooms across the country by the FCC was, what is the news philosophy of this station? Who decides which stories are covered? Whether a reporter ever wanted to cover a story and was told that they couldn't do so. Well, it seems to me that whether you have a conservative or liberal bent or you're down the middle of the road, you ought to have great concern when the agency that regulates the broadcasters decides they want to get into the newsroom to discover how news is developed at that station. That's not part of what the mandate of the FCC is, and it ought to raise genuine concerns about those who care about free speech. It certainly raised those concerns with me, and I came back to Washington, D.C. Today with the intention of highlighting this issue for my colleagues, making the American people more aware of this tremendous affront to the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And the good news is that Chairman Wheeler at the FCC announced just a couple of days ago that this proposal, as it included questions about how news was developed, was being withdrawn. And so, in part, I'm here to express my genuine concern about how did we get so far as for anyone at the FCC or their contractor to think this is appropriate behavior for a regulator. And secondly, to say that I'm relieved and pleased that Chairman Wheeler has stepped in to withdraw those kinds of questions. The argument was made that this is a voluntary survey, but as Commissioner Pai indicated in his opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, it's hard to see how something the FCC is asking of a regulated broadcaster would be really considered voluntary. The commissioner says, unlike the opinion surveys that many of us receive on the phone or in the mail, in which we can hang up the phone or never answer the phone, or we can toss the paper, the survey into the trash, when the FCC sends someone to your station to ask you questions about how news is developed, hard for you to say, I'm not going to answer the question when the FCC has control over your license. So I'm here to make certain that this kind of approach is something that it's in the past. And I serve on the Appropriations Subcommittee that is responsible for the FCC's budget. When they come to tell us about their appropriations request, I want to, again, I will thank Chairman Wheeler for withdrawing these questions, but I want to make certain that there is a genuine concern on behalf of all of us in the United States Senate, Republicans and Democrats, whatever brand of philosophy you claim to espouse or believe, you ought to be worried when the FCC is making inroads into how news and opinion is formulated at broadcasting stations, television and radio across the country. So, Mr. President, the speech I'd intended to give raising this topic is only given now in part, and it's my view that every American citizen has certain civic responsibilities. None of us members of the United States Senate, every American citizen's primary responsibility as a citizen is to make certain that we pass on to the next generation of Americans a country in which the freedoms and liberties guaranteed by our Constitution are protected throughout the history of our nation into the future. And so I ask that my colleagues be ever vigilant as we see just an ever-encroaching Washington, D.C. administration, even Congress, intruding in the lives of the American citizen, particularly as it relates to their opportunities for free speech. I'll be back later in the week to talk about other intrusions by the federal government into free speech and into political advocacy. But again, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to be on the Senate floor today to highlight what I think would have been an egregious violation of the United States Constitution by one of our federal agencies. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.